Salute, salute, salute. Bow. What's happening? It's Nocturnal Thoughts, man. Real quick video, and I'm gonna get out the way. Errol Spence has to have the mentality of a warrior going into this fight with Terrence Bud Crawford. Not the mentality of the fans. He has to be under a duality mindset, because a warrior, on one hand, has to feel like no one can defeat him, and on the other hand, has to contemplate the ability of somebody being able to defeat him. You know what I'm saying? They have to contemplate and ponder the idea of losing. But on the other hand, they have to feel like they can't be defeated. Like, I like what Terrence Bud Crawford said in the All Access 2 that some people shitting on. But Terrence Bud Crawford had some great moments in All Access 2. One thing he said was, when he contemplated the idea of losing, it was the amount of work that he put in and the confidence in himself that would force that thought out of his mind. But you have to think about it and contemplate on it first before your mind can process it and you know what I'm saying, make those thoughts be forced out of your mentality. Errol Spence and Terrence Bud Crawford, both of these dudes have gladiator warrior mentalities. But this is just a message in a bottle from Nocturnal to Errol Spence. I've heard him talk on some of the same talking points as fans talk over the years, and I've heard Terrence Bud Crawford talk on some of the same talking points as his fans as well. So this is not to say that I think one of the other guy is listening to their fan base more than the other. You know what I'm saying? But it's close to this fight, very close, 10 days out, and you really starting to laser focus, dial in, and your mind really starting to flip the switch. My main thing is, don't ever underestimate your opponent, and don't look at his resume and discredit any of his opponents, regardless of the talking points y'all talked about. You know what I'm saying? You ain't fought nobody, and you know what I'm saying, smoking mirrors and things you heard fans talk like. As a gladiator, you have to convince yourself on one hand that Bomac is the best boxing mind in the world, even though the dimensions of fighting inside the square circles are infinite. You got to feel like and think like Bomac is Doctor Strange, and he has an infinite source of knowledge to, you know what I'm saying, poured into Bud. You got to look at Bud, even though you got to look at him like you're going to step on him, you're going to break him, you're going to make him wilt to your pressure. You also, on the other hand, have to think that he can withstand anything that you put on him. You gotta convince yourself that he can't be broken unless you are the one to break him. You gotta think like all of his opponents were the best opponents in the world to conquer. You gotta think that I would say Rocky Fielding, I'm thinking of Canelo. What's the dude? Ricky Burns. You gotta think that Ricky Burns was one of the best of the best. You gotta think that Julius Ndongo was the best of the best. You gotta think that Felix Diaz was the best of the best. You gotta think that Hammer and Hank Lundy was the best of the best. You gotta think that Jeff Horn was the best of the best. You gotta think that Amir Khan was the best of the best. You gotta think the version of Kell Brook and the version of Sean Porter that Terrence Bud Crawford faced was the best of the best. You gotta think that Agitas Kavalauskas was the creme de la creme, and you got to think that Yoriokas Gamboa was the ultimate warrior. You got to think that everything Bud has done puts him to be the most dangerous man you ever faced on one hand. And on the other hand, you got to know, with all that being said, you're going to have the ability to overcome any adversity and break him and step on him. and apply pressure to him that's going to make him fold mentally, physically, and spiritually. That's my message in the bottle to Errol Spence. Do not think like a fan that's going over resume talk and discrediting the opponents. You got to think that the Lamont Peterson that you fought wasn't that great. You got to think that the Sean Porter you fought wasn't that great. You got to think that the Kell Brook version was not your ultimate test. You got to think that when you beat Chris Van Heerden, it wasn't no different than when Jerron Busena's head butted him. You got to think that when you beat Chris Algieri, he wasn't the greatest. You got to think the least of your opponents and say that Terrence Bud Crawford fought the best. You got to be the greatest champions are the greatest liars, because they had the ability to lie to themselves and feel like even in the staring at death, they not afraid. Even though they walking through the valley of death, they know that they cannot be conquered. No weapon formed against them shall prosper. So you got to look at your resume and say all those guys was nothing compared to what Terrence Bud Crawford did. And at the same time, while you doing that, you got to know that you are the big fish, the megalodon, the grave digger, the eye collector, Jeepers Creepers, man down, strap season. You know what I'm saying? And you the truth. And then you go out there and you prove it. Those are my thoughts. Like I said, there's many dimensions, there's infinite dimensions. And you got to have a dual person. You got to understand. You got to be able to, you know what I'm saying, think of everything and look at every single different scenario and ultimately see your way to the victory. But you think like a warrior. You don't think like these fans. Because these fans, they narrow vision, tunnel vision, blinders on. They got the blinders on like a horse in a race. They only gonna see what they gonna be able to see. But you got to be able to see with your ears and hear with your eyes and really focus on the ultimate prize, which no one that's a fan really knows. Only you know, and that's between you and God and your family. That's my message in a bottle to Errol Spence from Nocturnal. Bow.